Welcome to Rickshaw Scale Modelling. This is part 8 of the Avro Vulcan B.2 Scale 172 build. In part 7 I began with doing a little bit more interstructure work and then moving on to attach the wing. I ended part 7 with a bit of a disaster, breaking some of that infrastructure work. So this is where I'm going to carry on from. So let's see how I get on. So starting right where I left off, I'm placing the new support beams inside the infrastructure. These are the ones, of course, I'm having to replace. Looking back on it, I think there was probably a good thing this happened because the shape wasn't quite right. So I'm applying the struts just like I did the tail section here. If you can see the loops, that's exactly what I'm doing or done on the tail section. So they're just sitting while I'm actually fitting the tail section now. This just puts onto the fuselage. It shouldn't be any problems. I'm having a little bit of difficulty because like the cockpit section, there's only half of it getting attached. So I have to be quite careful that I'm lining this up properly. Remember, I pushed the wing back a little bit when I put in the cockpit. So just be careful if you're doing it like this, that you got it lined up 100% and you're not putting too much pressure on it. I did manage to make it slip a little bit, so I had to put a little bit of filler in, just where my finger is there. It was only a tiny little bit I had to put on, so it wasn't a big deal. And the reason why I keep on doing this is because it's difficult just to adhere the parts together in its half state. Because remember, it was built with the whole plane in mind being put together, not like this. So I am going to get problems like this as I go along, because I'm not really building it as Airfix designed it to be built. So I'm just putting in the last infrastructure ring in now. This one is going on the joint like the last one I put in for the cockpit, and just placing it in. Going on to the exhaust system now. These have a lot of connection points on them, which are going to have to be removed. Just be aware when you're taking them off though, there's a couple of little nubs of plastic as location points that really should be kept on, because they butt up against the outer wall of the exhaust. So have a look at it before you trim it up, and as I said, be careful when you're doing this. The housing for the exhaust location points are quite small, but they will line up with the little knobs of plastic that I left on, and they should just sit in on the outer covering here. There is a little indentation which they will sit in. As you can see, it can be a little bit fiddly and tricky to line them up. Make sure you've got them pointing the right way as well. There's a fluted end of the part to a solid circle part at the end. So have a look at the instructions, make sure you know it is facing the right way. Airfix do provide you with a little jig here to make sure you have the exhaust in alignment. Now this cannot be glued, it's not meant to be part of the exhaust, it's only a jig, a template for you to make sure everything's in line. It's also essential that you use this if you want to get everything looking straight. So each time you put a part on, just use your little jig and make sure everything is lined up. The other half of the housing comes in two halves. Again, make sure you have it facing the right way. It will not fit. If you see a gap at the bottom, you know you've got it the wrong way around. It took me a little while to figure this out, believe it or not. It just confused me really, trying to figure out which way it goes. So anyone can make this mistake really. But just be careful, as I keep on saying, making sure that you've got the right, correct orientation of this part. So now I've placed on the other part of the cover. I'm using my jig again just to make sure everything is lined up. As you see, it popped open there because it's not 100% dry. So again, I'm having to be careful that no glue goes onto the jig, because we do not want that jig to be attached to the exhaust system. I'm using Umbro's 11 silver here, and this is for the little vane, turbine vane things that go on the engine, so the rotating blades. So you don't really have to paint these in much detail because you don't really see them that well, but they do have to be painted. The inside of the main housing is getting painted in Umbro's 53 gunmetal, and that's also the same colour for the exhaust as well, on the inside and outside. The assembly part is quite simple. First of all, the vanes go in, they go in at the back. They should just fit in snugly. There's not much issue there putting them in, and then the front part attaches, and that can be a little bit tight to fit, so you may have to dry fit this just to make sure everything goes in alignment. I'm only dry fitting at this stage, I should point out, before I fit them, but you can fit them now if you like. I'm using Umbro's 130 white satin, and this is for the hinges that hold the exhaust in place. Now this colour will all depend on what colour the underside of your model will be. If you're doing it in all camel colour, obviously it'll probably be the darker grey, or if it's all white, it'll be white like this. I will also be using the 130 white satin for the underside of the casing of the exhaust system as well. Each side of the exhaust top cover is formed with part of the wing. Because I'm having one wing off, the section is going to be left open. This works to my advantage. I don't have to scratch build or cut away the wing that I'm not using to cover this up because I want it left open. So it's time to fit the actual end part of the exhaust, and this is only for the wing that I'm leaving as the cutaway. So to place it on, I've filed it down slightly, and it's just going where I put the engines, and it's just going to pop into there. It's difficult to try and get it aligned because of the scratch build engines. I may have to put in some filler, and in fact I did have to put in a little bit of filler, but I also had to put in a little bit of filler for the actual main wing as well. There was just a tiny little gap I wasn't happy with, so I thought it was best just to put a little bit of filler in before I move on. I'm placing in a little bit of strip of plastic card just where the tail meets the main fuselage of the plane. This is just a necessary evil because I'm not placing the other half of the fuselage on there together, so it's just to make sure everything lines up. I'm scratch building the tail end of the engine that connects to the exhaust. This is primarily so it lines up with the actual wing on the opposite side, and I'll be making this up the same way I made the engine. So I'm using the plastic tube that I primed when I built the engines, and I'm just wrapping tape around it to achieve the diameter that I need to fit the actual exhaust. Once I put the masking tape around, I'm also adding some insulating tape like I did with the main engine. This just gives it a more metally feel to the unit instead of just a straight plastic tube. It's organic in a way. It sort of has little dimps and bumps in it. I then cut up the larger size tube to match the smaller one, and of course the tape will help fit inside the larger tube, so I'm just cutting that off, and the smaller tube will fit inside the larger tube to form the tail end of the exhaust. I'm just checking for fit for length to make sure everything's right before I put on some of the wire sheath to act as a collar on the engine, and I'm just using a little bit of super glue to attach this. Initially I did it on both ends, but I removed one end of it because it looked too bulky. I thought it would look okay with both, but in the end I decided to just have it on one end. So once I was happy with the fit, it was just a matter of placing the smaller part inside and then priming it. But as you can see there, I've got both ends done, but as I said, I cut off one end after I decided it was too bulky. So it was primed and dry. I was painting it in Revit Alcohol 99 aluminium, then going over it with Revit Alcohol 90 silver. This just gives the aluminium a different sheen to it, but I left the collar in the aluminium colour. Once everything was dry, it was time to attach these parts. I used super glue to attach them. So as you can see, the first one is already on. I'm just going to be placing on the second one. And once that's dry and secure, I'm placing on the main part of the exhaust. I'm moving on to painting the wing now. First of all, I'm having to put a little bit of masking tape down the cockpit end and the tail end, just to mark off the fuselage. And I'm using Humbrol's 130 white satin for the colour. Because the cockpit and the tail end and the wingtips are grey, I'm placing down a lightish coat first of all to act as an undercoat. So I'm just placing this on, painting it on, I should say, in the normal way, just some small strokes. Once it dries, I shall go on to painting it properly. This just gives me a base coat to work with so that I can line up the tones with the wing. And before I paint the wing, I'm just marking in the panel lines with a pencil. The advantage with the pencil is you can get right into the lines and get them very straight. And when I'm painting, this graphite will smudge a little while I'm painting and cause the white to come off-white in certain places. Only do this if you're comfortable about doing it, because it can go wrong very quickly as well. It's a sort of cheap way of weathering your plane as you're painting, you know, so be confident if you're going to do it. And if it goes wrong, you can always repaint it anyway. But for me, this technique works, especially with white paint. And it sort of blends in with your paint as you're doing it. As I said, it withers it as it goes along, so that when you go back to sealing it all in, you're not going to wither it too much, because that's always a problem when you're painting. So going back to the actual painting now, I'm using my technique of painting light colours. So I'm using an old brush, and I'm just painting in smaller circles, hardly putting any paint on the brush whatsoever, and I'll be doing it all the way through from the cockpit to the wing to the tail tip, just building it all up. Now, something this size, it does take a long time to do, but it is worth doing it. If you have masked any areas off like I've done here at the nose cone, you'll have to paint from the tape onto the actual part of the model that you want painted. This is essential if you don't want any paint bleed, because if you paint into the tape, of course it's going to lift up the actual tape. So I'm going on to the wing section now and using the same technique. You'll start seeing that the graphite, the pencil, is mixing in with the paint and changing the colour of the white slightly. When it dries, it will be more of a brighter white, but there will be little patches of off colour to the white. So I think this is a good place to close part 8. Didn't get a lot done in this part, but the exhaust part was quite a lot of work to do. And I try and keep the videos under a certain amount of time, under the 15-minute mark. So it is a good place to stop. If you haven't done so already, why don't you check out the channel for the rest of these builds, or indeed all my other builds on the channel. If you subscribe to the channel, you'll be notified of all future updates, including for this build. Hit that like button and of course leave a comment. But for now, thank you all very much for watching. Bye bye.